Let me ask you a question this morning. How long does it take you to get ready to go out in the mornings? Are you able to do it in less than 30 minutes? Whoa, some honest answers right out of the gate. Now, there's some of you, I would guess the majority of it is women that are like, well, it depends. Like, can you give me a follow-up question to that? Like, am I going out to the grocery store where it's yoga pants, messy bun, don't care? Am I going to work? Am I going out for a brunch date with my significant other? Give me some more context to it, right? So that's that. Now, I'm just going to take a poll real quick, right? How many of you would guess that the ladies take longer to get ready in the morning? Anybody willing to risk it on that one? There's a couple brave men over there that kind of look at their wife like, don't hurt me. Any people out there think men take longer to get ready in the morning? So pretty much everybody voted for women, all right? There's a few of you that thought it was the men. Well, there's an interesting study that came out. A study that came out that showed that 52% of men take 11 to 30 minutes to get ready in the morning. Yeah. The crazy thing is, 52% of women take 11 to 30 minutes to get ready in the morning. So everybody has this idea that women take longer. Women, I'm here to help you out today, all right? Cast that myth aside, all right? And what's even more fascinating, that surprised me, I'll be honest. It did surprise me that there was an even number of men and women that take anywhere from 11 to 30 minutes to get ready, all right? But what I found fascinating is that the study went deeper, and 25% of men take longer than 30 minutes to get ready in the morning. And only 21% of women take longer than 30 minutes to get ready in the morning. And so my question is, man, what are you doing in there? Like, what is taking you so long to get ready in the morning? Now, I understand we're selective, right? We're selective about our clothes that we wear. We're selective about the shoes that we wear, the pants, the accessories that we've got. We're selective about the scents even that we put on. We're selective on how we look at and the persona, the identity, if you will, that we put out there when we walk out of the house in the morning. Because the reality is culture shifted us to think about ourselves as a brand. Culture's caused us to think about ourselves as a brand. Now, most of us do it without even thinking about it. That's, I would say, the majority of us create our brand, so to speak, without even thinking about it. And there's nothing wrong with presenting ourselves in a certain way. Because, I mean, you look at Hallmark, right? You can identify Hallmark by their little crown logo and you think sincerity, right? You get a Hallmark card, sincere. Or you think of like the two bulls crashing into each other for Red Bull, right? It's symbiotic with excitement and crazy and out there stuff. You think of a brand like Apple. Apple's known for its minimalism and its sophistication. Or a brand like Jeep, right? That is just rugged and tough and outdoors oriented. The thing about it is the brands are familiarized by the products that they put out and by the image that they place. And in a way, our personal brands are the ways people perceive us, the thing that we put out for people, the actions that we show, the choices that we make, the things that we do. At least that's what culture tells us how we should identify. You have to act this way. You got to look this way. You got to have those things. You got to do this. And we allow our brand to be shaped by what culture says we should be. And the reality is, the Creator, not culture, should define our identity. Amen. The Creator, Jesus Christ, not culture, should define how we find our identities. So we're continuing our series that we're calling Reckless. We're looking at the life and studying the life of Peter. And in week 1 of the series, we talked about how Peter was in the middle of a storm with his buddies. They were on a boat. The storm was raging. Peter had the audacity to step out of his comfort zone and step into the water. And because he took that step, he was able to experience Jesus like no one else has experienced Jesus. And because he took that step of faith, his faith was stretched. And because his faith was stretched, his faith was able to grow. And in week 2, we looked at our need as Christ followers to define our relationship with Jesus. We need to figure out if we're going to live our lives as fans or as followers. Do we really know Jesus, or we just know a lot about him? And then last week, Pastor Dave, he talked about the choices that we make and the people that we surround ourselves with and how we're living our lives as Christ followers. And are we living our lives to point other people to Jesus? And so today we're starting week 4 of this series called Reckless, and I titled today's message, What's Your Brand? What's your brand? What do you put out there? This Reckless series, I said, we're studying the life of Peter, and Peter was a unique individual, but he was a guy like many of us. That's why we love Peter, because we can put ourselves in Peter's shoes, and we just see so much of us in Peter. He was this average guy. He's got lots of ambition. He's full of passion. At times, it was in the wrong direction, but he was nonetheless a passionate guy. He was a Galilean. He was a fisherman. Peter was just an average guy like us. He was a blue-collar, hard-working guy that Jesus points and says, hey, come and follow me. But Peter was living his life not in full surrender to Jesus, because we look at the way that Peter lived and the choices that he made, and he lived life a little bit recklessly. And so we're looking at these decisions that Peter made. And yet, with all of the decisions that Peter made, all the crazy things that he did, all the things that people say about Peter, Jesus looked at Peter, and if you don't know this, Peter's name was originally Simon. Jesus looks at Simon and says, Simon, no longer are you Simon, I will call you Peter, or Petros in the original language, which means rock. And upon this rock, Peter, I will build my church. Jesus so changed this man's identity that he was able to take all of his past, all of the things that he wasn't, and said, this is what you are. And that's what happens when you live a life fully surrendered to Jesus. Jesus says, I don't care about your past. I don't care about what you were. This is who you are, should you choose to live your life in full surrender to me. And so in Luke 22 is where we're going to be today. Luke, in this passage, he's telling this chapter is about the last night with Jesus. So they're having the Last Supper. They're there up in the upper room sharing a meal together, all of the disciples. And Jesus looks and he talks to Peter and he's like, Peter, buddy, I love you, but you're going to deny me 3 times before the dawn of the new day. And Peter's like, whoa. This is Peter's response in verse 33. He says, Lord, I'm ready to go to prison with you and even die with you. Now that sounds like our Peter, right? He's just passionate. He's like, this is not going to happen. There's no way this is going to happen. And I read this and I can't help but think of Peter and think he would have figured it out by now. Like Peter, at this point in the story, Peter spent 3 years with Jesus. He's been traveling with him. He's been listening to him. He's been watching Jesus do all these miracles, and he's like not getting it. I would assume that after 3 years, he would figure out that when Jesus says something is going to take place, it usually happens. But Peter's a little bit hard-headed. And if you're like me, you can be a little bit hard-headed sometimes. And it takes a little bit to get things figured out. And so Peter's not fully getting it. He's looking at Jesus and he's like, Jesus, you are wrong. There's no way that I'm going to deny you. I'm going to prison with you. I will die with you. He's giving this story, if you will. Audrey and I were in this season where we're watching Survivor, the show Survivor. We started in season 1 and we're working our way through the entire series. And if you don't know, this is a long-lasting show. I mean, they're up season 40-something right now. We haven't got there yet, but we're working our way through Survivor, and the whole point of Survivor, right, is to outlast, outwit, and outplay everybody. And so you've got all these people that are in Survivor, and you see these people make all these big claims. They're like, I am with you to the very end. And in the very next breath, they're talking to so-and-so over here, and they're like, no, we're taking them out tonight. And there's all these blind sides that happen, right? They're over and over, and that's one of the joys of watching this game. You're like, there's no way they're going home tonight. Oh, my word, they're going home tonight. Like that's the joy in watching, at least for me. I'm like, oh, that stinks for your journey. But man, they played that really well. Now, that's not Peter and Jesus, because Jesus was not blindsided by Peter's statement. I hope you understand that. Right? Jesus knew that Peter was going to make this decision. Jesus wasn't blindsided about Peter, what he had to say. But just a few hours later, Peter has just made this claim, like, Lord, I'm going to prison with you. I will die with you. And then a few hours later, what's in verse 54, it says, so they arrested him and led him to the high priest's home. And Peter followed, catch this, at a distance. Peter, the guy who had been right by Jesus' side, who hours earlier had said, I am not leaving you. I will go to prison with you. I will die with you. He says, I'm going to follow at a distance. I'm going to keep my distance from this guy. Verse 55 says the guards lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat around it, and Peter joined them there. Here's Peter. He's our passionate Galilean, right? And this passionate Galilean is now subdued, and he's almost passive. Jesus is arrested, and all the bravado of Peter, all this excitement that he's got with each step that he takes, it shrinks back further and further from bravado to almost denial. This big thing that Peter was is no longer. And Peter is just standing there in the background, hoping that he can just blend in. He wants to be close enough to see what's going on, but not so close that he's seen by the other people. I think Peter saw what happened to Jesus and how Jesus was arrested. And Peter, when he sees this, he allows fear to begin to take over in his mind. This fear gets in and settles in his life, and he begins to distance himself from Jesus. And I can only imagine the thoughts that are going through Peter's head of, why are they seeing me? What if I get noticed? What happens if this? And so he begins to distance himself. That fire, that passion, that excitement that Peter once had has now burned away and is almost extinct. Peter's brand is me. It's survival for me. It's about what's comfortable for me. His identity becomes what everyone around him is saying. His identity becomes associated with the crowd that he's surrounding himself with. And he begins to think, how can I fit in here? What's interesting is Paul says this in his letter to the church in Philippi. He says, everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. So thinking this passage, what's Peter looking out for? Is he looking out for the interests of Jesus? That man that hours earlier, he said, I'm with you to the end. And he's like, I'm going to stand at a distance. I'm going to hide. And I wonder how many of us are in that same boat. How many of us are sitting here and we're looking out for brand me? We're following Christ, but at a distance. We come to church on Sunday. I mean, you're here. That's great. But that's where it ends. There's nothing more than just showing up. You're a good person, right? And the voices around you, they tell you that. They tell you more than that. But can I tell you something? That Satan uses the voices that surround us at times to speak lies into us. Because if you don't know this about Satan, he is a very tricky and very smart guy. Because Satan knows reverse psychology. He can use the reverse psychology to get you to do nothing as well. He says, hey, you're a good person. You don't have to give 10%. Really? You got to give 10%? I mean, you're here enough, aren't you? Like, just the couple times a month that you come that's acceptable. You helped your neighbor last month. Isn't there somebody else that can do it now? You don't need to get involved in church. I mean, look at all the people around. Like, somebody else will take care of it. You don't have to worry about it. And what happens is we buy in to this cheap grace that Satan offers us because he wants us to do nothing. He wants us to stand at a distance from Christ. He wants us to feel guilty. He wants us to feel helpless. He wants us to feel hopeless inside of our hearts. You see, you can be in church in body, but your heart can be far away. Your lips can say the right things, but your heart can be far from God. You can raise your hand and sing all the songs you want, but your heart can be far from God. It's this identity. Where is our identity found at? The text, it says that Peter warmed himself by a fire. I would insinuate that it's cold outside if he's warming himself by a fire. He gets to a spot where he's comfortable. He gets into his comfort zone and he surrounds himself with people who aren't following Jesus, which is not unlike many of us. We surround ourselves with people who aren't following Jesus, and we begin to believe, like Peter, that Jesus can't see us. We get comfortable out in the world, but I'm telling you, our walk gets far from God when that's our mode of thought. Because a good position does not always mean a good condition. A good position does not always mean a good condition. This is what I'm saying, that just because you have a good viewpoint doesn't mean that your identity is found in the right place. Just because you're seemingly close to God doesn't mean you're really close to God. You can come to church every Sunday, you can come to every event that we have, but your heart can still not be in the right place. When you get to where you need to be with God, God will change your life. There's a trend going around right now on Instagram, and it's been around for a while, but it's really popular right now, this idea of Instagram versus reality. Now, those of you that don't have Instagram or understand, let me help you. People will post a picture or a video online, and it's them standing. Audrey showed me one last night. It's this lady that's standing on this edge of this cliff in this huge chasm. It's this incredible scenery. And her dress is blowing, and she's up there just like nothing else is happening. Nothing can bother her in the world. And then all of a sudden you see the camera, and the camera pans about 10 degrees to the right. And there's like 250 people lined up over here waiting for their chance to have their Instagram-worthy moment. It shows you the people that are backed up trying to get up the mountain while others are trying to get down the mountain. It is not the perfect picture that we're trying to portray. And what happens is we're trying to create an identity. We're trying to curate ourselves in a way that culture wants us to identify. And Jesus says, we can't identify with culture. You're missing it. It has to be in our heart. It has to be in a personal relationship that is totally surrendered to Jesus. So here's Peter. He's lurking in the dark, following Jesus at a distance. And he finally steps into the light. He steps into the glow of the fire. And it says the servant girl noticed him in the firelight and began staring at him. Finally, she said, this man was one of Jesus' followers. But Peter denied it. Woman, he said, I don't even know him. After a while, someone else looked at him and said, you must be one of them. No, man, I'm not, Peter retorted. And about an hour later, someone else insisted, this must be one because he is a Galilean too. But Peter said, man, I don't know what you were talking about. Other translations say that he actually cursed in this moment, that he cursed actually knowing Jesus. Peter, who hours earlier had said, I'm with you, I'm your ride or die, Jesus, I'm with you to the very end, is now saying, no way would I ever be associated with this guy. And what's interesting is this first interaction with this girl, Peter's confronted by a servant girl. There is no legal action that this girl can take whatsoever, and Peter immediately digs his heels and is on the defense. Because there was nothing illegal about being in the company of Jesus. If there was something illegal, the rest of them would have been arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane that night. So they wanted Jesus and Jesus alone. They didn't care about his followers. And Peter's already got this fear in his head. He's begun to wrap his identity in other things. He says, I don't know this guy any longer. Peter was one of the 12 disciples who Jesus pulled aside to be his inner circle of 3 people. He's one of Jesus' closest followers. And yet when Jesus needed him the most, Peter said, I don't even know this guy. I don't know who he is. In private, Peter had this incredible professed faith in Christ, but in the face of a hostile public, Peter denied any type of association with Jesus. And immediately, it says while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. At that moment, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Suddenly, the Lord's words flashed through Peter's mind. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny me 3 times that you even know me. And Peter left the courtyard weeping bitterly. This isn't your average Hallmark scene, right, where you've got the sun setting or the sun rising and 2 people turn and look at each other and it is everlasting love. It's not this. It is 2 people turn and look at each other and it is brokenness in one man. Peter realizes what he's done. He is broken. He takes off weeping because he had allowed the crowd, the people that he had surrounded himself with, to form his identity instead of allowing his identity to be found in the Creator, in Jesus Christ. You guys, we are living in a day and age where there is a war going on for our identity. We are constantly spending time and having access to what are called identity-forming idols. They may not be like people in Peter's day, but in their book, Faith for Exiles, David Kinnaman and Mark Matlock, they talked about these algorithms that are driving our identities and how they're being shaped. They say the marketers behind the algorithms know who they would like you to be so they can sell you things. Companies understand better than ever before what it means to market and position themselves. People are being led to believe that there is such a thing as elective identity. This idea that you can define your own identity. The individual, they would say, is the ultimate authority of what's true about yourself. You discover truth about yourself by you. And Christians and people have fallen for this misunderstanding of identity. Many think that you can believe and you can be whatever you want as long as it doesn't disrupt, as long as it doesn't cause issues with the greater society as a whole. Because culture is shaping and attempting to shape our identities. Culture is telling you that you can create your own brand. You can curate it. You can create whatever you want it to look like. You do you, is what culture tells us. And Peter is caught up in the mess of this mistaken identity trap that the crowd, that culture had begun to tell him. And maybe you're here today and what I'm sharing has you a bit uncomfortable. Can I tell you that's not something I'm saying? That's something the Holy Spirit is doing inside of you. He's speaking to you. He's saying it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to allow culture to define you. Let me do it. Let me give you a greater life with greater purpose, with greater hope, with greater joy. Let me help you. It doesn't have to be like this. He's telling you culture doesn't have to be the one to define your identity. We read this story so often from Peter's perspective because we associate with Peter. We can put ourselves in Peter's shoes. We see it. We understand it. But as the rooster crowed and Peter's identity was misplaced, Peter and Jesus, they locked eyes, and Peter's reminded of what Jesus said. But let's look at it from Jesus' perspective for a moment. Here's Jesus, arrested for nothing. This man that he said was going to be with him to the very end. He turns and he looks at Peter, and he sees a man full of regret, full of shame, full of pain, full of failure, a man full of sadness. But he sees more than that. He saw all those things and he said, I still see a man filled with potential. I see a man that can be used by God. I see more than the things that he sees. I see beyond it. Every one of us has potential to be more than we are. We don't see it, but Jesus sees it. Jesus sees what we can be rather than how we see ourselves, rather than we are. Jesus gave Peter a look of potential. And he saw a man filled with possibilities, filled with opportunities. You see, Jesus went to the cross for those possibilities, those identities that he gave you. But if you don't know Christ today as you should, you're denying Christ every single day. You deny that he's got a place in your life. You deny that he can change you in any way. You deny that he could heal your sickness. You deny that he could change your situation. You deny Jesus. But fortunately, Jesus loves those who deny him. Because Jesus died for your denials. Jesus went to the cross. He gave up his life. He suffered the most gruesome death for those denials, for those mistakes, for that misplaced identity, for those betrayals. Jesus suffered and died for all of it. That's what 2 Corinthians says. For God made Christ, who never sinned, to be our offering for sin so that we could be made right with God through Christ. Jesus went to the cross so that our mistakes don't have to define us, so our past does not have to define us. Remember, Jesus was sitting there, and Peter denies Jesus the third time, and what happens? The rooster crows. Think with me for a moment. Peter wasn't an old man at that point. And every time after Peter heard a rooster crow, can you imagine what went through his head? Imagine the thoughts that went through his head of what he did when he said, I don't know the man. I don't know Jesus. So what roosters are crowing at you? What roosters are crowing at your head and at your heart? What rooster is reminding you of your screw-ups, of the mistakes that you made? Whatever it is that you did or didn't do. What's the enemy trying to plant in your head? What's the enemy trying to plant in your heart? What are those false identities the enemy is trying to get you to adopt? Because the reality is, the rooster can only remind you of your mistakes. The rooster can't tell you who you are. The rooster can't give you an identity. It can only remind you of who you used to be when you said yes to Jesus. You don't have to listen to the rooster anymore. When that rooster crows, you can tell him, I don't have to listen to you because you don't define who I am, because I'm a child of God. He sacrificed his life for me. My identity is found in Jesus Christ and in him alone. My identity comes from the Redeemer, the author and perfecter of our faith, from my redemption. It comes from our good shepherd. It comes from our provider. My identity is found in that. My identity is not found in what people say about me. My identity is not found in what culture says about me. My identity is not found in my inadequacies. My identity is not found in my insecurities. My identity is not found in my financial situation. My identity is not found in what happened in my past. My identity is found alone in Jesus Christ, the creator of me. That's where we find our identity. The creator, not culture, define your identity. The question is, will you listen to his voice? Will you listen to the crowd? Culture that's telling you something completely different. Because only Jesus can define who you are. Would you pray with me?